At the first light of dawn, on one of the following days, when Ra, the creator of the world, sailed gently across the cloudless blue sky in his solar bark, we set off for yet another extraordinary place, one that in antiquity was the most cherished destination for any Egyptian. We were heading to Middle Egypt, to glorious Abydos. Here, the Nile, hemmed in by steep banks on both sides, flows with unusual turbulence. In ancient times, this stretch of the river had a sinister reputation. It was said that ships often met their doom in these waters. Yet this place was also home to a holy Sheikh, Selim, who was often seen running naked along the river bank. Boat owners frequently sought him out, hoping to receive his miraculous blessing, believed to protect them from the dangers of the Nile. The man has long since passed, but for many years his tomb was venerated. His son, following in his footsteps, spent his life sailing in a boat covered in colorful rugs. As passing ships approached, superstitious travelers would throw offering in his boat, and in return he would bestow his blessing for a safe journey. Of course, our journey was not to seek such blessings, but to witness with our own eyes the gateway to the afterlife, a place that, according to tradition, lay here, within the desert valley of Pega, framed by two sacred mountains, the mysteries of life and the Lord of Offerings. Every culture has its places of pilgrimage. For Christians, it is Jerusalem, for Muslims, Mecca and Medina, but for the ancient Egyptians, that place was Abydos. They longed at least once in their lifetime to stand upon the sacred ground and become part of the ancient mystery of Osiris's resurrection. Every year in November, the month of Kayak, the divine procession would emerge from the great temple of Osiris at Komel Sultan, bearing the solar bark of the god. The procession would carry it to the valley, where, through a series of elaborate rites and sacred transformations, Osiris would be reborn, securing not only his own immortality, but also granting eternal life to all departed souls, whose names were spoken during the festival by their loved ones. For this very reason, the ancient Egyptians constantly brought their deceased relatives to Abydos, those who longed to be buried here, or at very least to have their remains placed for a time near the tomb of the great god of the afterlife. Interestingly, although Osiris was revered here as a god of the dead, there was a time when he embodied life itself, serving as a personification of the mighty Nile, the force that fertilized the great Isis, the black fertile earth that bore Egypt's most precious gifts. During the Nile's annual flooding, the waters of the river were considered the new waters of Osiris, bringing life to the fields, painting the land green once more. But when vegetation withered, Osiris died, only to be reborn with the next flood, symbolizing his eternal cycle of renewal. He became the god and protector of the dead, the first dweller of the West, replacing another ancient lord of Abydos, Anubis. The Egyptians envisioned Anubis as a wolf or a jackal, for every evening they saw these creatures roaming among the tombs at the desert's edge. Osiris also displaced Sokar, the Memphis lord of the dead, who was highly revered during the Pyramid Age. Over time, Sokar faded into near obscurity, while Anubis retained a more symbolic role, becoming the first divine embalmer, the one who taught the Egyptians the art of mummification. Yet it was the story of Osiris's tragic death and his resurrection as the divine mummy, supreme judge and lord of the dead that captivated the Egyptian soul most deeply. They came to believe that every righteous deceased, man or woman, who was deemed worthy in the hall of judgment in the underworld, would themselves become an Osiris. At the same time, however, the departed never forgot that as a new Osiris, the greatest blessing they could receive was eternal closeness to the divine predecessor, the original Osiris himself. And what could be closer than the tomb of ancient king himself, also located here in Abydos, near the gates to the afterlife? Today it is known as Osireion, and it remains a popular pilgrimage site, though now it is visited by tourists, all eager to touch the mysteries of this ancient world. What I find especially remarkable is that despite the vast number of legends, myths and beliefs in ancient Egypt, and despite the fact that different gods often shared the same functions, there were never any religious conflicts, at least if we set aside the Amarna revolution. Every person was free to worship the gods that felt closest to them and believe in what resonated with their heart. No one found it strange if their neighbor held entirely different beliefs. After all, the divine realm was considered unfathomable, and the more perspectives one had, the closer humanity came to understanding the truth. For instance, it was completely natural to believe that the solar bark of Ra, the bark of millions of years, descended into the underworld after sunset. The new Osirises welcomed it joyfully in the dark chambers of their tombs. Yet at the same time, the greatest blessing was to accompany the sun god himself on his daily voyage across the heavens aboard the sacred bark. And as they wandered through the halls of the underworld, awaiting the return of the sun, they were also believed to be fulfilling their duties, plowing fields, baking bread, harvesting bountiful crops, and building great dams in the eternal domain of Osiris, on the sacred fields of the afterlife. It seems that in the last 4,000 years, our way of thinking has become impossibly narrow. What was once a natural and self-evident truth is now difficult for us to grasp. And how unfortunate it is that in the 21st century, with our holy wars, religious intolerance and endless prohibitions, we so often lack the wisdom and tolerance of the ancient Egyptians. But let us not dwell on sorrow in this extraordinary land of eternal celebration and life. Especially since our next stop will take us to two of the most well-preserved temples of ancient Egypt, which have survived almost entirely in their original splendor. Auguste Mariette once remarked that two sentences suffice to describe the construction of this remarkably well-preserved monument. It was begun under Ptolemy XI, completed under Tiberius, and its decorations were finished during the reign of Nero. When the temple was being completed, Jesus Christ was living in Jerusalem. Yet, like many other sanctuaries, it was built upon the remains of a much older shrine, so ancient that Thutmose III in the 16th century BCE and before him Pepys I in the 23rd century BCE were already restoring it as something from forgotten times. The ancient Egyptians worshipped a divine triad here: Hathor, the supreme goddess of love, beauty and kindness, Horus of Edfu, her consort, the solar god, and Ihi, their son, the young Horus who united Upper and Lower Egypt into a single land. Since antiquity, Hathor was also venerated as a goddess of the sky, often depicted as a cow, a gentle, nurturing creature whose milk gave color to life itself. However, we now know that this benevolent goddess could also reveal a fierce and terrifying aspect, transforming into the lion-headed Sekhmet. Yet she had an even higher wrathful form, the mother goddess Sopdet, an enormous black scorpion with blazing eyes. Despite her fearsome appearance, the Egyptians still adored her, for they believed she was not truly malevolent. They affectionately called her Sheritau Ra, the little one in the hands of the sun god. She was also known as a Lady Renepet, the goddess of the year who governed the cycles of life. At the dawn of the new year, she would strike names from the scroll of life, determining who was destined to die in the coming year. And she was none other than the star Sirius, whose appearance in the sky heralded the annual flooding of the Nile. Here, in her temple at Dendera, she was worshipped above all as the goddess of love, beauty, flourishing life, and the constant renewal of nature, a deity whom the Greeks identified with their Aphrodite. Her broad, gentle face, framed by heavy braids, her delicate calf-like ears, and the great solar disk resting between her horns, all served as a reminder that she was the beloved daughter of the sun god Ra. Every day, a designated priest had to enter the sanctuary with the ritual statue of the goddess, burn incense before her, recite the prescribed prayers and invocations, and after bathing the statue, dress it in fresh garments. On the ceiling of the temple, one of the most astonishing depictions of the sky goddess Nut can be found. According to myth, her father, the sun god Ra, commanded her to rise and stretch her back, taking a position of repose. And so her body became the celestial vault, while her hands and feet rested upon the earth, forming 4 pillars that held up the sky. In this position, she carries upon her back the sacred bark of the sun god, which glides across the heavens. Stars shimmer upon her skin, and the great heights make her head spin. She trembles in awe, yet by Ra's decree, the god of air Shu supports her, while her husband, the earth god Geb, raised hills and mountains beneath her, offering her comfort. There is also a depiction of a proud and legendary queen, one who deeply revered this temple, Cleopatra, wife and sister of Ptolemy XIV, shown in the form of a goddess. Beside her stands a small figure of her son, born of the Roman Emperor Julius Caesar, Osireion. In the small birth temple, dedicated to the divine child of the great couple Hathor and Horus, another important cult was celebrated, that of Bes, the little bow-legged dwarf god, who was greatly venerated by women devoted to their families. Do not be alarmed by his somewhat fierce expression, for this little god was in truth the protector of motherhood, pregnancy, and the household hearth. He was believed to be a god who heard every plea and could easily offer personal help to those who called upon him. In this temple, the birth of the royal heir was celebrated. It was also a place where young women came to seek the god's help in attracting a suitor, and where wives, fearing their husband's waning affection or longing for a child, prayed for fertility and safe childbirth. The Temple of Hathor is filled with mysteries. It holds hidden chambers, crypts, and offers a breathtaking view from its rooftop, where yet another small sanctuary stands, left unfinished. This incomplete structure allows us to see how the Egyptians crafted their magnificent columns, known as Hathoric columns, for the face of the goddess Hathor adorned their capitals. On the eve of the new year, the ancient priests ascended to this rooftop in a solemn procession to await the rising of Sirius in the eastern sky, the celestial sign of the ending era and the birth of the new cycle. Meanwhile, below both within the temple and outside in the courtyard, ordinary people gathered to celebrate one of Egypt's grandest festivals, New Year. But imagine this, in a velvet dark night before dawn, illuminated only by torches and oil lamps, amid the fragrant smoke of burning raisins and a profusion of colorful flowers, surrounded by dancers and musicians, playing flutes, castanets and sacred harps. The priests solemnly carried out the statues of gods and goddesses, revealing them to a sleepless crowd that had gathered outside the temple. Finally, the procession halted in a moment of hushed anticipation, awaited the morning dawn and the rise of the beloved star, the harbinger of the blessed flood and the renewal of the land, fertilized by the Nile's waters. Then, joyful cries, new hymns, dancing and music erupted as the Sirius appeared at dawn, rising in the immaculate eastern sky just as the first rays of the sun illuminated the horizon. Thus was celebrated the majestic Egyptian New Year, a festival of renewal, abundance and the promise of life. In another part of the country, deep in Upper Egypt, 800 kilometers from Cairo, stands the temple of another great Egyptian god, Horus of Edfu. He is called so because his temple is located in the city of Edfu. Do you remember the legend of how the god Set murdered his brother Osiris and seized the Egyptian throne? And how Osiris' wife Isis, with the help of Anubis, created the world's first mummy? That story does not end there. Soon after, Isis gave birth to their son, Horus, the falcon-headed god who grew up determined to avenge his father and reclaim the throne that was rightfully his. He fought Set for many years, and during one of their battles, Set tore out Horus's eye. Yet their strength was evenly matched, and neither side could gain the upper hand. Then Set devised a cunning plan to kill his nephew. He challenged Horus to a contest in boats. As Horus stood aboard his vessels in the middle of the Nile, Set transformed into an enraged hippopotamus and charged at him, intending to tear him apart. But Horus did not falter. He seized a harpoon, took aim, and was ready to strike his enemy down. At that moment, Set realized he had lost and begged for mercy. In the end, Set was forced to return the throne of Egypt to Horus, along with his lost eye. However, Horus did not place the eye back in its socket. Understanding its immense power, he instead offered it as a sacrifice to a mummy of his father, Osiris. This supreme act of devotion from son to father set into motion the great transformation, the process through which Osiris was resurrected, transcending death and attaining eternal life. At last Horus ascended the throne and became the great ruler of Egypt. The Egyptians deeply revered him, believing that every pharaoh was his earthly incarnation. The temple, as we see it today, was built during the Ptolemaic period on the site of much more ancient sanctuary, one that had long been revered as the place where Horus achieved the final victory over Set. Among the ritual reliefs of the temple, there is a depiction of a festival dedicated to the legendary event, which was celebrated on the sacred boats gliding across the temple's holy lake. In dozens of ritual scenes, the god Horus defeats the forces of chaos, affirming his rightful rule over Egypt and establishing divine order and balance. At the culmination of the festival, a red hippopotamus, symbolizing Set, was ritually sacrificed. Inside the sanctuary, the naos has been preserved, a stone shrine that once housed the sacred statue of the god. The top of the naos has a pyramidal shape, representing the Benben stone, the first mound of earth that emerged from the primordial waters of Nun at the dawn of creation. Nearby stands a reconstruction of the sacred bark created by French specialists in the 1950s. Though not original, it provides a clear representation of the divine boats used in religious processions. In many ways, the Temple of Horus closely resembles the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, both its layout and in the arrangement of its inner chambers and sanctuary, surrounded by 3 small side chapels. It is likely that by the Ptolemaic era, Egyptian temples were being constructed according to standardized architectural plans, with occasional adjustments made to accommodate older sanctuaries that already existed on these sacred sites. The remarkable preservation of this temple is due to the fact that it was quickly buried under desert sands and forgotten for centuries. As a result, it has survived in an exceptional state, surpassing all other temples in Egypt, and even some of the most renowned monuments of the ancient world, in the preservation of its pylon, courtyard, interior chambers, and surrounding enclosure walls. One of the most significant ritual festivals celebrated in this temple was the divine marriage, during which Horus of Edfu was united in a sacred bond with the goddess Hathor of Dendera. The festival took place during the annual flooding of the Nile, when a grand procession of sacred barks set out on a ceremonial voyage. The bark of Horus led the flotilla, sailing first from the groom's temple in Edfu to the bride in Dendera. After the union was consummated, the newlywed goddess, now bearing a divine child, traveled back to her celestial husband. The walls of the temple depict nearly every stage of its sacred ceremony, along with the many divine guests in attendance. Among them is the rare image of the god Atum, the creator of the universe, as well as one of the Ptolemaic kings. Since most rulers of the Ptolemaic dynasty were not Egyptians and did not even speak the Egyptian language, the temple artisans and priests often choose not to inscribe their names. Instead, they would simply write Per Aa, the great house, meaning the royal court. In the inner sanctuaries, where outsiders were not permitted, they sometimes left the cartouches of kings completely blank, refusing to defile their sacred spaces with the names of unworthy rulers. However, one royal name is known to us: the king depicted on the temple's main pylon, striking down his enemies in the iconic smiting pose. This was Ptolemy XII, the father of the Cleopatra VII, the legendary queen who would become not only the last woman to rule Egypt, but also the last Egyptian pharaoh. After her reign, Egypt fell into the hands of the Romans, and its ancient culture gradually declined, fading into history. For political reasons, the Ptolemies were forced to maintain a delicate balance with Egypt's powerful priestly caste throughout their reign. To appease the population, they carefully preserved the illusion of continuity, ensuring that the Egyptian state and its traditions appeared unchanged. One after another, the Ptolemies sought the people's favor, lavishly supporting the temples and building magnificent sanctuaries for the gods of Egypt, all while attempting to play the roles of the ancient pharaohs. Yet there was one fundamental truth they never grasped. In the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians, foreigners simply did not belong. The Ptolemies could not act the intermediaries between the people and their gods, nor could they bring the breeze of eternal life into this world. Money could buy the loyalty of the priesthood, but it meant nothing to the common people. After all, eternal life could not be bought, no matter how great the sum. The Temple of Edfu is one of those places in Egypt that is difficult to leave behind. We regret departing just as we have begun to know it, but the day is short, and the unyielding sun, despite its love for the Egyptians, is now aging, transforming into Atum, the god of the western sun. He is ready to board the final bark of his daily journey, descending into the western valley near Abydos, where he will drift through the afterworld in the 12 hours of night, passing through all 12 halls of the afterlife. But we already know that the Lord of the Sky will rise once more the next morning in the east, reborn as a divine child, emerging from the petals of a water lily, greeted by joyful baboons and all of humanity. If you visit Abydos, do not miss the Temple of Seti I, with its magnificently preserved colorful reliefs, the finest in all of Egypt, and the Temple of Ramses II. Though they do not fit the narrative of our journey, we simply leave them here for you to discover.